So last time I did my presentation with this graduation from West Point. And so that's where I'm going to pick up today. I'm going to go through up until he was named director of the Manhattan Project. Then my last talk will really focus on the responsibilities that he did for that and his relationships with the people under him. So if you remember, Groves was put on the War Emergency course at West Point, so he graduated a year and a half early, as did the rest of his class. But ironically enough, he and the rest of his class graduated November 1st, and the armistice was signed on November 10th or 11th, I believe. So World War I ended before any of them actually got to any of their assignments. So instead, he was sent to Camp Humphreys in December 1918 for his first assignment, and then he was sent on a series of overseas educational tours, mostly in France, where he learned the layout of battlefields because he was really interested in the strategy behind war, and so he wanted to see how everything in Europe played out during World War I. And then he went back to school, so after he got back from overseas, he went back to school and graduated from the Engineers Basic Officer course in 1921, so that way he could become an official officer within the Corps of Engineers. So his early career, so after he got back and graduated from the officer school, he was stationed at Fort Gordon, which was very beneficial for him because that's near Seattle, Washington, where Grace Holbert lived. If you remember, this was his longtime crush. They met when they were teenagers. Their dads were really good friends. They worked in the same regiment. And so they got married in 1922. And then he was the lead or assistant lead on many construction projects that allowed him to prove his skills in his early career, and he was stationed all over in Hawaii, Texas, Delaware, Vermont, Nicaragua, Kansas, and Missouri, all prior to going to D.C. and becoming part of the official officer corps. Okay, so could you go one slide forward for me? Oh, right there. Okay. So I wanted to talk about two of his assignments in Vermont and Nicaragua because he had a lot leading up to the Manhattan Project, but these were really interesting. So the first one in Vermont in 1927, he was sent to Fort Ethan Allen, and while he was there, this massive flood happened in New Zealand. And bridges were breaking all over the place. So he was sent to oversee construction of new bridges and emergency roads that would allow people to get around during this flood. And so one pontoon bridge that he and a group of his engineers were working on was actually swept away, and Groves was accused of negligence. But this was later disproven, given that there wasn't really anything Groves could foreseen about the floodwaters coming to that area before they were trying to build pontoon bridge. But then 1 month later, in another one of his projects on a different bridge, some TNT that was left over from World War I actually detonated because they didn't realize that it was there, and they kind of did some construction on or around it that caused it to detonate, which led to serious injuries of Groves, his superior officer, and a fatality in one of the people that was working under both of them. And so again, he was accused of negligence, and his direct superior blamed the entire thing on him and asked that he be sent back because he wasn't doing a good job in Vermont. But then the chief of engineers, Major General Edward Jackman, actually blamed Groves' superiors, and so Groves' name remained clean, but they did send him back. He was working in Delaware, they sent him back to Delaware because of his issues with his direct superior in this case. And then in 1929, he was stationed in Nicaragua to survey land for the interoceanic Nicaraguan Canal. While he was in that station, a major earthquake occurred in 1931, and Groves took over the water supply for Managua, which is the capital city of Nicaragua, and it has a really large population. Most of the country's population actually lives And so after Gross took over the water supply, everything was regulated back the way it was supposed to be because it was in just extreme disrepair after the earthquake. So he actually earned a Nicaraguan Presidential Medal of Merit because of this. So that was pretty interesting.
Now, let's see, what was the Panama Canal there? I listened to that book on tape. No, but before they dug the Panama Canal, they were debating about whether to dig it across Nicaragua or Panama. And they decided on Panama, right?
Yeah, I believe that this was related to that, and so that's why he was there surveying the land.
But they didn't dig it.
Right.
The Panama Canal was like 1905.
Well, that was earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, so then maybe they.
So maybe they were going to do another one.
Maybe.
I know that they were considering this canal, and that's why he was sent to survey the land, but I don't know.
Yeah, so Panama Canal was earlier.
So then Groves, after earning the Nicaraguan Presidential Medal of Merit, his superiors really saw the skill that he had for construction, and so he decided that with some coaching of his superiors, he was going to become a major officer. And so there are some steps he had to take to become a really high officer within the military. And so one of those was to graduate with the Command in General Staff School, which he did in 1936. And in 1939, he graduated from the Army War College, which goes back to him serving in battlefields in France after World War I, because he actually got, when you graduate from this college, you get a master's in strategic science. And the reason he was so interested in that was because of his adventures after World War I in France. So after he graduated from both of these, he was assigned to the General Staff of the Corps of Engineers in Washington, D.C. And he was promoted to major really quickly after he was assigned there to do really good work, and he was assigned to the office of Chief Engineers, which is the highest office with So he was then put on the construction division, from 1940 to 1942, and he was attached to all Army construction as the chief of the operations branch and as the assistant chief of the construction division. And this was a really monumental task for him because from 1940 to the height of World War II, the Army grew from 135,000 people to 8 million. So he was in charge of constructing all of the bases, overseeing all the things that were needed to support this many people if they were to enter into the war. And so he being part of the construction division led to some other things that he did in the Manhattan Project, because he met with a lot of companies in a lot of different states and national companies, and he found out which ones he liked to work with, which ones he found most competent in doing all of building the bases and the laboratories and all the things that they were going to need for the Army. And so that later leads to some of his choosing during the Manhattan Project. But in 1941, he was placed in charge of building the Pentagon, which covered 34 acres of land and cost $31 million. Again, Groves dealt with a rush schedule, which goes back to his time at West Point because of World War II. And so when they started the Pentagon, they knew that it was going to be the head of the Army, but they were considering the option less that they were actually going to enter World War II. So it was kind of on just a normal construction schedule, but especially after Pearl Harbor, which was only a couple months after Groves was placed in charge of the building. They put it on a rush schedule. It was completed in 16 months, which was 2 years ahead of schedule. And they also added $12 million to the project to incentivize all the laborers and people to move faster. So he was used to dealing on this rush schedule. So here's the Pentagon. These are kind of blurry. But this was it during construction and what it would have looked like almost completed during Groves times. And this is what it looks like today. So you can actually see that they've changed almost nothing except some of the satellite parking lots around to deal with all the new people. But his design, his overseeing of the design and the construction has stayed through today. So did a pretty good job. Okay, so now we're moving into the time of the Manhattan Project, and I found this really interesting that Groves was actually not the first leader chosen for the Manhattan Project from the Corps of Engineers. The reason the Corps of Engineers was chosen to run the Manhattan Project by the Secretary of War and President Roosevelt was because they had such a large wartime budget and so many resources that it would be easier to hide what they were doing within their budget and resource needs. They didn't have to ask for a lot because the Corps of Engineers was already getting it. And so the original leader of the project was Colonel James Marshall, who was chosen in June of 1942. From the Secretary of War, his responsibilities were given to him as site selection, material acquisition, the building of laboratories and factories. But he was indecisive and ineffective, and so the Secretary of War actually pushed the chief officer of the Corps of Engineers to set up a committee to find a new leader. But the chief officer and his assistant both remembered Groves from all the things that he did in the past, and they recommended him. So they didn't even set up a new committee. It was just those two. They decided it, and they recommended Groves. The Secretary of War was on board. And so Groves took over the project in September of 1942 as Brigadier General. So his general responsibilities included choosing the site for the enrichment of uranium and plutonium reactors, securing personnel and resources, domestic and foreign intelligence. He kind of took upon himself to start this project because he was really big on ensuring secrecy and also wanted to keep track of Germany's progress. And he was also in charge of establishing new training bases and overseeing the construction of the new B-29s that were going to be necessary to hold the bombs that they were building. They were going to have to be on a whole new scale. So he was in charge of training the people to fly them, to build them, and the design of the plane. So this moves us into using past experience, which I've already touched on a little bit, but everything that I've talked about today really made Groves into the perfect guy to lead the Manhattan Project because he was used to the fast pace needed for the Manhattan Project, which was one of the issues that they had with the leader chosen before him, Colonel James Marshall. And he's used to this from West Point because he was on the War Emergency Force and the speed of the Pentagon construction that got sped up. And he knew which companies he needed to work with and which ones could get the job done, which ones were the most competent. And so he was really sure in his decisions, he was able to make them really fast. And he knew how operations could begin during construction because this was also required during the Pentagon construction that the offices needed to be used to ensure secrecy and things during this, our entry of World War I. They were still doing construction around those offices that were being used. So he knew how to run an operation during construction. So next time I'll talk about the more specifics of those responsibilities that I just went over.
Questions?
How old was he when he took over Manhattan? Do you know?
I do not know off the top of my head. I think he was born in 1897, and so in 1942 he would have been 5. Yeah, that picture of him that I have on his responsibilities page, that is when he took over the Manhattan Project. So that's I have a feeling all of his projects that he had took a wear and tear on.
He was a hard driving SOB.
Yeah, I read a lot about that, so I'm going to go into a lot of detail on that. There's a lot of reports of people that were under him describing his style of management. And so I think that's going to make really interesting slides next time.
Yeah. I did not know that somebody else had been chosen and then fired.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I mean, they were in charge for like 4 months, and so they were just doing such a bad job. And the Secretary of War directly was like, "You've got to remove him," because one, the assistant of the chief of the executive office thought that he was doing a good job, and so he was the one that was kind of overseeing the progress. And he was like, "Oh, he's doing fine," and the Secretary of War was like, "No, he's got to go." So that was pretty funny.
Excellent. Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah.
Okay, now to chapter 17 in Rhodes' book. Things were progressing, of course, by this time in 44. And, Niels Bohr was not a big-time technical advisor to the Manhattan Project, but his passion was thinking about what happens after World War II concerning the atomic bomb. He saw an arms race. He saw a very unstable world with various countries trying to catch up with the U.S. and England on nuclear weapons. And even though his meeting with Churchill, or his meeting with Churchill and Roosevelt did not work, they crashed and burned, still Bohr has planted these ideas that we needed to worry about World War II policies concerning to the atomic bomb. And so Vannevar Bush and James Conant were, of course, two of the leaders of the Manhattan Project, the civilian side, and they had some resonance with Bohr's ideas, and so they sent a memo to the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, who I guess was the guy that fired General Marshall, and said that we should consider ways to avoid an open arms race after World War II. Perhaps we should have an open exchange of information concerning the atomic bomb. And perhaps we should have cooperation between countries of the world. Of course, with Bohr's idea of complementarity, that these weapons, if everybody had them, would be so awful that countries might actually then live in peace and communicate with each other. So the main thing was Heller was working with the Soviets. Bush had some resonance with Bohr's ideas that you should give the secrets on the atomic bomb to the Soviets. Now later we'll find through spies they already had the secrets. Klaus Fuchs, one of the spies in Los Alamos, who was sending stuff to the Soviets throughout these years of the Manhattan Project. So that was going on. Also, remember the discussion of the bigger atomic bomb. Fission bombs were either from the fission of uranium-235 or plutonium-239. That's where we were headed. It was Teller that was pushing the idea of a super bomb. Based upon nuclear fission, but based upon nuclear fusion. Teller was one of the Hungarian Jews, very smart guy, but very controversial. He kept pushing Oppenheimer during the Manhattan Project to let's skip these fission bombs, let's go to the fusion bomb, the super bomb. Many times bigger in blast than the fission bomb in his calculations. That was a thorn in the side of Oppenheimer during the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos. And Teller calculated that one super bomb might release a billion tons, blast a billion tons of TNT. And this would be equivalent to staggering out to a third of all the conventional explosives used in World War II. So his calculations showed that this was really a very large potential. But Oppenheimer didn't want to divert the vital resources of Los Alamos, so he's kind of put Teller over to the side to work on super bomb. Life at Los Alamos was difficult. It was high pressure. It was, of course, very secretive. The city was within a fence. There were no telephones at homes. There was one telephone for laboratories that could not communicate outside. All the mail was open and watched carefully, mail in and out of Los Alamos. People worked 6 days a week, worked nights, and so they had Saturday night and Sunday to relax. They were partying on Saturday night. Square dancing was a Western thing. The great Nobel laureate Enrico Fermi from Italy learned square dance. He learned it by not taking lessons, but by sitting and watching for a couple of weeks to do all the steps. And then he went out and did it perfectly. That's who Fermi was. Very smart guy. Kistakowski from Harvard, chemistry professor, taught some of the Europeans poker. They never gambled using poker before. Well, of course, Kistakowski took their money for a while, but then these very bright mathematicians like Coulomb and von Neumann learned the tricks, and so by the end of the Manhattan Project, they were taking Kistakowski. So that was one area of Rose was concerned about how many babies were being born. Not surprising, people were brought from all over the country to be in the Manhattan Project. They were young. Many of them had their graduate studies interrupted to come to Los Alamos. So naturally, babies were born. Gross thought this was too many. He told Oppenheimer, do something about this. I don't know what you can do about this. Back then, at the same time, Oppenheimer's wife, Kitty, gave birth to her second child. So there's nothing you can do about this. It's the nature of the age of the people there. Fly fishing was another activity. Segre and Fermi were the Italians. Segre worked in Fermi's lab in Rome, so they became expert at fly fishing. That was a good area for this. But Fermi always was looking for new ideas. He refused to use the artificial bait people used. Said that, gee, these fish you're trying to catch should enjoy worms at least before they die. But that didn't really work. Did a lot of hiking on Sundays when they had their one day off. Good area for hiking out there in Los Alamos. And of course, one frequent participant was Klaus Kuhn. So you have later on, he was a spy. He was German. He hated Hitler, became a communist, left Germany, to England, became part of the English effort on fission and uranium, came to Los Alamos. Turns out later on he was found to be a spy and convicted. So he was feeding secrets to the Soviets all of his time in Los Alamos. He was an avid hiker. Niels Bohr, the Danish liked to hike. In Denmark, they don't have skunks though. So when you go to see a skunk hiking, you would want to befriend the animal. And you learned that that was not the wise thing to do. Even over the golf course in Los Alamos in June of '44. So they're trying to keep people happy in spite of the high security and very aggressive work schedules and isolation. And Oppenheimer had great respect. You know, his record before World War II as a leader was not very impressive. He was viewed before World War II as a ladies' man, smart guy, but hardly a leader of people. Los Alamos, he was respected as a wonderful leader of people, as the smartest guy up on the mesa, as the person who knew all details of every aspect of the operation, who cared about people and was always aware of the needs of the people, an open door, trying to help people there. And he did not make anybody feel inferior or like their job was not important enough, even down to the machinists and the janitors. And it reminded me, as I read this, about Tom Mason. Tom Mason was lab director at Cornell recently, a year ago. Young guy, and the smartest person I've ever met, the smartest man I ever met, the smartest thing I ever met was my wife, Tina, who died 3 years ago. Tom Mason, the smartest man I ever met, same thing. He understood all aspects of Oak Ridge National Lab, cared about people, and was just a wonderful leader. So they were similar in respect. He Even though Oppenheimer was viewed as the perfect leader by everybody, he was under constant surveillance because of his alleged communist leanings before World War II. In fact, he dated a communist. Kitty, his wife, had communist leanings. Okay, so the army had him under constant surveillance, following him wherever he went at Los Alamos or beyond, tapping his phone, having cameras in his office and his house, all being questioned regularly by the army, even while he was living in the laboratory, about his friends who were or had been communists, trying to trip him up every time they questioned him to see if he would make a mistake, that they could put something on him. They followed him in June of 43. He went out to visit Jean Tatlock. That was his former girlfriend. She was having psychological problems. She committed suicide later. And he went out to try and console her. He was married by this time to Kitty. But he went out to visit her in 43. And of course, they watched him stay in her apartment overnight and reported all this. So he was always under constant surveillance.
Was she a communist?
I think so. Maybe she had been married to a communist. I think she was married to a guy who was in the Communist Party in Spain and died there. Also, Oppenheimer spent time on board. Niels Bohr was there, and his board pitched his thoughts about opening atomic secrets so the world would not get into the arms race. He became rather fond of those views and convinced that this was the right way to go, which of course endeared him even less to the security people. Technically, the big question was implosion. So this was rather straightforward. The bomb builds on uranium-235. That was called a little. That was a gun type of mechanism. Where you had that, uranium. And then you would, to make a critical mass, you had to have a little cylinder of uranium. You would shoot that with TNT into that annulus, and when then you got the core there in the annulus, then you had a critical mass, and then go off. And so that was a simple mechanism that worked easily. But they realized early on that this did not work with plutonium. It wouldn't work because this is too slow. And when you shoot this in, the fission start because of plutonium-240, but you also make it the same reactor where you make plutonium-239. That was the spontaneous fission source. Because of that, you had to make everything come together more quickly, or else it would fizzle. The bomb would fizzle where you got the two hunks of plutonium together. And that did an explosion. And that was a huge technical challenge. You had to find a way that you'd have uranium, plutonium at the center. You had to find a way, and you had something called tamper. You had to find a way to have chemical explosives that compress the plutonium quickly to make it have a critical mass and have a chain reaction. A huge technical device. A lot of people worked on that. They had to do ways to measure it. If they were building explosives around the perimeter of the sphere, have uniform explosions of all these charges around the sphere to make a uniform compression of the plutonium in the middle. They had to find a way to measure that. You would measure it by doing X-ray scattering off of this exploding device as you were experimenting out with plutonium just to see if you could get uniform compression. But you didn't want to destroy your X-ray tube, so they had to build kind of block houses where you protect your X-ray equipment, one to shoot X-rays through this mass in the middle of two houses fortified, the other to detect the X-rays, and then observe the explosives as they went off to see if there was rather uniform compression from a spherical array of explosives. So they had to invent the techniques to see how to measure that, and then redesign the explosives to make a shock wave, or to calculate the shock wave to see the magical measurements. So it's both experimental and theoretical. And nobody worked on explosions, such symmetric explosives that can quickly spherical compression. Big challenge. Von Neumann, Nobel laureate mathematician later on, one of the Hungarian Jews also, was also that he designed a new complicated arrangement of explosives, like conventional explosives. The way they were trying to do it was just not going to work. So he designed shaped explosives. And nobody thought this would work either, but Von Neumann was one of the world's best mathematicians and convinced people to give this a try. And it's complicated. So something like this, you've got the plutonium in the center. You've got the tamper, which would help compress the plutonium to critical density. And then you have different kinds of explosives around here in different sections in the spherical array. You had a fast burning outer layer of explosives. And then you had a shaped, slow burning inclusion, this thing here. So you can explode, instead of a shock wave, the outer part of this truncated car battery size explosive, and then it would detonate the slow burning, more spherical array of explosives. And so the shock wave here would initially be focused on the center here, but then when you combine with the slow moving explosive, you get a shock wave. You see here, shock wave that ends up, by this calculation, being spherically symmetric around the center. And that's what you're trying to achieve. A shock wave like this that would hit the tamper in an uneven way would be a spherically symmetric shock wave from each of these that would then, at an instant, uniformly compress the tamper and compress the plutonium. Von Neumann's calculations showed that this could work. It was a tremendous test to build it. Kostakowski, the chemistry professor from Harvard, was appointed to be head of the group that would design this. The Army Colonel Parsons was firmly against this. He was taken out of the direct line of this decision making because he didn't think that you had a team to play with conventional, more easily designed explosives. But by December 1934, this process, calculating what the shapes would be, experimented with them, doing very fine machining of all the pieces, and it looked like it might work by the end of 1944, these shaped explosives. They had to decide. There was this debate going on between Kostakowski, shaped explosives, and Parsons, who said that was crazy. We need to go back to simpler types of explosives. That's his calculations that said the shaped explosives would work. Finally, then, Oppenheimer folks had to settle it. They finally agreed to freeze the design on implosion with the shaped explosives. The Von Neumann calculated, Kostakowski measured. So by March of 45, first atomic bomb was dropped in August. burnt out. So it was getting close to the wire. It was only in March when they said, this is it. Direction of shape explosive involved very precise machining tens of thousands of pieces to make this whole complicated assembly fit together and work perfectly. Turns out it didn't work perfectly. But that was a huge challenge. Another challenge was the initiator. In the center, you had to have a few neutrons in the center to get this going. You have to wait for cosmic rays. There are neutrons floating around. Cosmic rays from the sun, from the solar system, from the galaxy, are zipping through when cosmic rays are higher than gamma rays. When they hit the atmosphere, they produce a few neutrons. So you might be able to trigger it with just random neutrons coming through. You can't depend on that, and so you need some source of neutrons, a radioactive source in the center that you would build into the ball that would initiate the fission chain reaction. Robert Serber had talked about the fact that you need a source of neutrons in the center. At the time, they thought they would use radium, the element discovered by Marie Curie with beryllium. So that's how people throughout the early part of the 20th century made neutrons. They did radium-226, I think it was. Getting the alpha particles. Getting a beryllium core. That gives off a few neutrons. But the problem with this is it also gives off gamma rays. So that's hard to work with. And so they decided they would try instead a polonium-210 source. Not as small dip. Just mostly alpha particles, include beryllium, and make neutrons. So that's 130 per day. So they had to find polonium. They gathered it from sources at different hospitals and such. People using it for treatment already. Cancer in the early days. And so the idea was how to get them to contact. You know, they did experiments, figured out a source of a gram or two of polonium would give 55 million neutrons per second. So it's like a lot. But the point is that you got to have it in the 10 microseconds when you need it. That when you're compressing the plutonium, at a time window of 10 microseconds, 10 to the minus 6 seconds, 10 to the minus 5, where you've got to have the neutrons there. So in that time window, this 95 million neutrons means you're going to get 9 or 10 neutrons to be there if you need it. But that was enough if you did this right mechanically. So that was a challenge, how to get the polonium and beryllium to interact, be compressed, and in contact so you could generate these 9 or 10 neutrons in that critical 10 microseconds. And the plutonium is ready to go. So they overcame that. Things were moving slowly in Japan on their uranium project. Nishina was a nuclear physicist at Riga in Tokyo. He had spent time with Niels Bohr. He was a friend of Niels Bohr. He had been in Copenhagen like all nuclear scientists were in the 20s or 30s. He was 60s and 70s later. But Nishina had been there in 1921, became friends with Niels Bohr. Later on, wrote a paper, a famous paper on Compton scattering with Oscar Klein, who was in Copenhagen at that time. So he used the Klein-Nishina formula. So he was a well-known nuclear physicist, Japanese, and he was working on the Japanese uranium project. He did calculations. This is the calculation. Remember the movie that there was in Heisenberg. Did you do the calculation? Heisenberg, of course, knew that billion bomb based on natural uranium, you need a ton. In the movie, at least Bohr said, Heisenberg, did you do the calculation of how much you need? He had uranium-235. He said, no, I never did the calculation. But the she that did the calculation realized that if you had 10 kilograms of uranium-235 at 50% enrichment, then you could build a atomic bomb. Problem was, he needed a cyclotron to do measurements. With a bomb, you would use using fast neutrons, not moderated neutrons like you do in a reactor. And you got to know that cross section. You got to know how likely it is for uranium-235 to be fission with fast neutrons. Is it 10 milligrams? Is it 50? Well, you need the measurements. You know, the U.S. did measurements. Fermi did measurements. Germany did measurements on that. But it was hard. They had built a cyclotron, but you needed more energy, you needed high quality vacuum tubes to get the acceleration. And in war-strapped Japan, it just wasn't possible to come up with those pieces of equipment. So he had difficulty. He worked on gaseous diffusion. That's the Little Bridge. He worked on thermal gaseous diffusion. And knew what he had to do with his team. Knew that you had to get uranium in the hexafluoride form, which is gaseous uranium hexafluoride. He had trouble doing that. Technically, that is a challenge. And he only managed to maybe get 170 grams of uranium hexafluoride as a gas that he could then infuse through his gaseous diffusion rig to enrich it in uranium-235. By this time, the U.S. had gotten through this problem. They were making tons of uranium hexafluoride to feed our process by gaseous diffusion. So Japan was behind on that too. Nishina met with his army contact November of 44 to say that he needed this and that. He hadn't made enough progress because he had very little support. The army contact did not understand anything that he was talking about. Thought he was talking about conventional explosives. So that was essentially the end of the Japanese Manhattan Project. So by December 44, the U.S., Groves, and Oppenheimer were convinced that you were going to get 10 kilograms of uranium-235 from Oak Ridge sometime in early 45. You probably have tens of kilograms of plutonium-239 from Hanford, Washington by summer of 45. The implosion process for the plutonium bomb was coming together finally. The next step is, as Kurt mentioned, was the B-29, a way to deliver the bombs. Now, this was, at this time, a very heavy device. I forget the number, 20 tons or something. Because at that time, they weren't quite sure how much uranium one needed for a chain reaction. So they had to then start to form the delivery team. A guy named Paul Tibbets was chosen to form the team, figure out how to modify the P-29 to carry the bombs, and then to train people. This is hard to make a set of aircraft that could deliver and drop accurately this coming atomic bomb. He was experienced and the best bomber pilot in the U.S. He had flown, he had led B-22 bombing missions from England to Germany. He was a a test pilot of the new B-29 Super Fortress, the biggest airplane in the world, was just coming online at this time. His father wanted him to go to medical school when he got out of college. He wanted to fly. He and his father argued violently over this. His mother pulled him aside and said, okay, it's all right. You go join your army, you can fly. So he went to medical school. That's why he named his plane the Enola Gay after his mother. She supported him. And that was the plane to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. They chose a place in Utah for a place where they would train the crew of the fleet of B-29s, test the aircraft, rig the aircraft to carry these heavy bombs, experiment with dropping dummy bombs to understand how it works. So he had a lot of people in this room, the Tibbets, together. B-29 was one of the largest aircraft in World War II. The wonderful new device built by Boeing, the most advanced bomber at the time. This was designed to fly high altitudes, 30,000 feet. So this is the first time we had pressurized cabins in the airplane because you're going to go up high. You had to have it pressurized so people could survive. It had remote controlled machine guns. First time, instead of having men point the machine guns at fire an aircraft. It was designed as a high altitude daytime bomber. It also actually flew a lot of low altitude flights. It was a heavy plane, needed 8,000 feet to take off. Very wide wingspan, should get enough lift, try to take off and fly. It was designed to go 4,000 mile mission with very heavy loaded bombs. The advantage of flying at 30,000 feet is that that was a bubble where machine gun flak could go. It was a bubble where fighter planes could go. And so if you go up that high, you're safe. The engines were a problem. They were designed to have a lot of power. They were on the edge. So when you really need to pull full throttle for a length of time, they're made of magnesium block to be light but strong with magnesium berms. So they're susceptible, engines are susceptible to catching fire. So this was an experimental aircraft. Tibbs' team had to experiment with how to refit the cargo bay to carry and then drop precisely very heavy bombs. Atomic bombs. Nobody else knew on this team of hundreds or 1,000 people what this was all about, but only Tibbets knew that this was dropping an atomic bomb on Japan at some point. Curtis LeMay is a character in the Pacific War. He was a hard driving, cigar chomping, hard drinking type of guy who is called a wild man by many. Very important part of the story of the Pacific War. Later, he was running mate to George Wallace in 1968. George Wallace, by the way, you all remember this. George Wallace ran for president in '68 on a third-party ticket. He was governor of Alabama, and he was this fool, the governor that stood in the doorway of Alabama and said, "We'll never let Negroes into my university." So he was segregationist through and through. That was the South then. No university, not this university. Oh no, that's not true. UT had the first black students in '60. Yeah, I know the guy. We were like something. Yeah, let's see. He was the vice president. He's retired now. I can't remember his name. No, I've known him well. He's one of the first batch of 3 or 4 black students that Theodis, yes, Theodis Robinson. Right. And he's from Knoxville, and 62, 63 UA graduates. They forced the issue and got admitted to UT. Alabama, that was deeper south. And so this was later, 66, 68, when George Wallace, governor, stood and said, not at my university can students be there.
Became the national university.
George Wallace?
Yeah, the Broad Point.
Yeah.
George Wallace.
Well,
You weren't born.
no, never forget, my parents, I was in graduate school here, working over there for my PhD research, Vanderbilt physics doctoral student. My parents gave me a beautiful red Ford Mustang. But then when I finished my PhD, I got a fellowship to go to Copenhagen for a year, and so I had to sell the Mustang. Sold it to somebody. We left in fall of '68. Somebody wrote to me that year in Copenhagen and said, "You know, you supported George Wallace." It turns out the guy I sold to put a Wallace for President sticker on my beautiful Mustang. Broke my heart. Anyway, the point is that Curtis LeMay was George Wallace's running mate in '68. He was a controversial, kind of crazy man as an Air Force general, retired by this time. And of course, they didn't, but they did get 50% of the popular vote. Of course, Wallace, the usual thing, politician, late in his career before he died, he candidates and he supported integration and all that stuff. He was just a segregationist. Yeah, sure. So, see, the B-29s started arriving in Saipan in the Pacific in October '44. November '44, U.S. and British leaders decided that we're going to have to invade Japan. You know, Germany invasion of Europe occurred in June of '44, and that was successful eventually. Germany surrendered in the spring of '45. Nobody thought that Japan would ever surrender in that same way. You're going to have to invade. So the B-29s were an important part of that invasion strategy to do precision bombing of targets in Japan. And remember the different precision bombing meant. Selective bombing of military and industrial sites. Altitude was logical, B-29s, so you could be out of the way of enemy anti-aircraft fire, out of the way of their fighter jets, fighter planes. But yet, and carrying out bombs that you could precisely drop them on industrial plants and cripple Japan that way. They did an experimental raid November 24th to test out this with the first B-29s, and it didn't work at all. It was a disaster. Turns out that there's a jet stream. Nobody knew, nobody had flown that high. Turns out there's a jet stream if you go up to 30,000 feet. You know, the jet stream, we now understand the physics of that very well. The jet stream results, see at the equator, here's the North Pole, here's the equator. The sun heats the earth more at the equator than at the poles. Hot air rises. So at the equator, hot air rises, spreads out. Cold air from the poles comes down at low altitudes to fill that void. And so that's the natural circulation. At the equator, hot air rises, goes to the poles, cold air comes in. But then it gets more complicated, in part because the Earth is rotating. You have the centripetal force. You know, centripetal force is such a good. If you're hearing at the equator shooting, you're in Cuba near the equator shooting a missile in Florida, and you shoot your missile off. You know, the equator is turning faster than Washington because the radius is bigger there. That's the centripetal force. You shoot your missile north, you've got to take account the fact that you're rotating faster. You have a higher velocity in this direction than Washington. So it curves. If you're on the surface of the Earth, there's some curves in your frame of reference. That's the centrifugal force. Well, that affects weather too. And so because of that, you have curvature of the winds. And that's why hurricanes always, the northern hemisphere always circulate counterclockwise. Cyclones in the southern hemisphere come to the southern hemisphere, rotate around the low pressure area clockwise. That's the centrifugal force. Because of that, then you have these currents. The air, these hot air dives down at medium latitudes and at high latitudes. Fresnel cell, Pauli cell, that gives rise to a jet stream, a big jet stream around 65 degrees north latitude, and a subtropical jet stream around 35 degrees north latitude. And that's a band of air winds that are quite intense at those latitudes. And they go around the globe. You know at the jet stream. Sometimes the jet stream dips down to our latitudes and brings cold air from Canada. And well, from Canada, from the high latitudes down to our heating latitudes. But in 1944, no one knew about the existence of a jet stream. And so when they tried to do raids on Japan at high altitude, it didn't work. They couldn't do precision bombing because the winds up there. And so it was in chaos. B-29s were arriving. Many of them, the idea was they have hundreds of B-29 in Saipan and Tinian to start to attack Japan, soften up Japan for the eventual land invasion. But none of that was working. This B-29 fleet was having no success. And the time of the invasion was coming. And none of this was working. So that's where Curtis LeMay comes in. A guy named Haywood Hansel was in charge of this command, this B-29 command, to believe in precision bombing. Hansel did. You know, we can perfect this so that we're not killing people, destroying cities, we're bombing military sites, industrial sites. That's what we mean by precision bombing. As opposed to area bombing, where you're just dropping bombs on anything around cities, people, just to destroy that country and break their will. But time was ticking. Orders came from Washington to Hansel to do a trial fire raid, it's called, on a certain city. Because high precision bombing was not working, so let's just do area bombing. Make some incendiaries, firestorm raid. Hansel resisted, but he did carry out the first firebomb raid January 3rd of 45. 3 days later, Hap Arnold, the general of the Air Force, removed Hansel from duty and put Curtis LeMay in charge. He had served in China, aggressive commander, you know, guy hoping for success. Nothing would stand in his way, and so he was put in charge of this array of B-29s. The solve the cost of the jet stream, the bad weather of Japan. You see, the bad weather of Japan was out of Siberia. Our allies, the Soviet Union, didn't want to feed us information on weather patterns coming out of Siberia, so it's hard to predict bad weather conditions in Japan. So it was not going well. Fear was the invasion would occur. After occur, we could lose 500,000 people, maybe 1 million soldiers when we go into Japan by ships. So LeMay, Curtis LeMay, by the way, he took the example of Dresden. Dresden was firebombed. There's a photo of the devastation. On February 15th of 1945, the British sent 1,400 aircraft, and they dropped high explosives and 650 incendiary bombs. Bombs to start a fire, not just a fire, but a firestorm, a conflagration, a raging fire that advances out of control, sucks the oxygen up. So of the 130,000 people killed in Dresden by this 2 waves of firebombing, many can die by suffocation. In their basements, they weren't burned, but the oxygen was gone because of this raging fire, potentially started by this type of bomb. So it showed that this would work, that you could kill a lot of people this way by starting a firestorm in the city. It burns everything in sight, it kills people by fire or by suffocation. Indeed, in Dresden, that was been a lot of criticism of Dresden ever since that was done. It was not a city in Germany important for military purposes. Yes, there were some industries there. And in retrospect, the critics say you could have spared it like Rome, Paris, and Kyoto were spared. But that showed that you could really devastate the city by fireball. So that drove LeMay, Curtis LeMay, to do this to Japan. The other thing that drove Curtis LeMay was Iwo Jima. See, the U.S. had by this time taken back Guam and Tinian and Saipan. So the B-29s were located here. Japan was here. You were going into Japan. Probably fall of 45. So this was the launch pad. Iwo Jima was 900 miles closer to mainland Japan. Iwo Jima was heavily fortified by the Japanese, a small island, 7 square miles, just a small, insignificant volcanic island. But the Japanese were dug in big time there, because it was halfway between here and there. They had radar there, so you could pick up, and then they would launch some aircraft from there to get flat, cause troubles to the B-29s located here. So it was a sign that we would go attack Iwo Jima. Small island, the Japanese were completely dug in, tunnels, buried tanks, and artillery. There was no idea that reinforcements would come to help the Japanese area. This was a suicide mission to defend this, kill as many Americans as possible, inflict so much damage on the Americans, make it so expensive to take this little 7 square miles. The Americans might say it's too hard to invade the homeland of Japan. So this was intended to be suicide on the part of the Japanese to defend this island and make it as costly as possible on the invading Americans. The carnage was terrible on the beaches, all kinds of shrapnel and cannons went back and forth. It said you couldn't tell if the mutilated dead person was Japanese or American, so badly mutilated. But it did work. It took a couple of months, from February to March, that there were 30,000 initially that were in the attack. Another 30,000 were added. Out of that, probably 7,000 died. And another 22,000 wounded. So just terrible carnage, but it did work. They took Iwo Jima. There were 20,000 Japanese that died and only 1,000 captured. That same philosophy the Japanese had. We're going to die rather than surrender. The idea it was a war of extermination rather than strategic victory. So So that produced one of the enduring images of World War II, raising the American flag on Iwo Jima. That's a stamp. It's one of the great images. Putting the U.S. flag on Mount Suribachi. But it was very costly to take Iwo Jima. So that was, LeMay was under pressure because of Iwo Jima and the losses there, and because of the lack of success of precision bombing of Japan. So, of course, LeMay decided he would have to do incendiary bombing of Japanese cities, like was done in Dresden and Berlin. So on February 23rd, they did a raid part of Tokyo, apart from the Imperial Gardens. They 172 B-29s attacked Japan, Tokyo that night, and they came in low. They decided that even though it's dangerous quite low, that the Japanese didn't have enough anti-aircraft guns at Tokyo, so they modified the B-29s to come in low to get more incendiary bombs on it. They took out the guns, so they were flying naked, so to speak. No way to defend themselves. They could drop the maximum number of bombs on Tokyo. Marched down another 334 B-29s left. Same thing to do incendiary bombing of Tokyo. They burned out a square mile of the city. I think that's right here that, I know people thought, some of his staff under LeMay thought he was crazy, thought this guy is nuts, we got to move him from his position. He did tell his superiors in Washington, but only at the very last minute, that he was about to go on this raid on Tokyo. It's a devastating raid. Huge number of firebombs were dropped. There was a wind of 20 miles per hour in addition that whipped up the conflagration. 16 square miles of city were burned and leveled. 100,000 people died and maybe 1 million were injured by this firestorm of unknown proportions. A lot of people, 1 million people had their homes burned to the ground. A lot of people jumped in the river, submerged in the river to avoid the fire. The water boiled. Just an unhuman situation. They followed up with fire bombs of 2 other Japanese cities. So precision bombing was gone by this time. Now it was just area bombing, fire bombing to wipe out cities and people, to break the will of Japan, basically. And 150,000 people probably died from these incendiary bomb raids in Japan. At the same time, in the U.S., there's progress on uranium enrichment finally. At the end of 44, I think there was chaos, but that was at the end of 44. By January 45, they had fixed the calutrons, and they are now making a couple hundred grams per day of enriched uranium out from the bed of calutrons. The estimate was by summer 45, there would be 40 or so kilograms of U-235 at Los Alamos to be used in the bomb. Piece by piece was shipped by armed couriers, versus businessmen to Mexico. Hanford was now producing and separating plutonium-239. So by summer, there should be tens of kilograms of plutonium available in the bomb. General Groves then authorized in 1943 the Alsos mission. We invaded Germany, Europe, in June of 44. We were pushing the Germans back. The question is, what was the status of the German atomic bomb project? No one knew. We assumed they were a year ahead of us. We were close to having bombs ready to drop on Japan. Didn't have to drop them on Germany now. But did they have an atomic bomb that was about ready they could use as a last hurrah to drop on London, perhaps, as being surrounded by the Allied forces? So Burroughs authorized Operation Alsos, led by Colonel Pash, Boris Pash, to go in, follow the troops into Europe, and try and find out what is the status of the German atomic bomb project. Pash, by the way, was the guy who was constantly leading the interrogation of Oppenheimer every week at Los Alamos. He was convinced that Oppenheimer was a communist and probably a spy. But Burroughs protected him. Samuel Gauss-Smith was the physicist attached to the Alsos group. And they followed the troops in after the Normandy invasion. And they advanced through France. And actually, the Alsos team was the first to enter Paris. They beat the army there. And the Germans retreated. And were the first to enter Paris. And they went to the Radium Institute that Madame Curie had started and talked to her son-in-law, Frederick Joliot. He was part of the people working on understanding nuclear fission around 1939 to 41. Then they were occupied. And so he didn't know anything about the German effort. They went down to Strasbourg in France, found a German physics lab at the hospital, but not much else. They found documents in there at Strasbourg indicating that the German project was not going too well. But then they had to move outward, that I'll talk about next time, to search out where's the supply of uranium that the Germans took from Eastern Congo in 1940. Where's their reactor project? Where's Heisenberg? And so that was the purpose of the Alsos mission, to follow the troops in as they took more and more of Germany and find out what's the status of the German. And that we will talk about next time.